Hey, Power People. Welcome to Renewable Rides, powered by VECKTA. I'm Gareth Evans, the CEO and founder.
And I'm Dan Roberts, head of sales. In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, learnings, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition, on-site energy, and sustainability through the experiences of our inspiring guests and team here at VECKTA.
So get ready for an exhilarating adventure into the fast-paced world of challenging limits, adapting purposefully, and empowering co-creation to accelerate the energy transition with those that are on a mission to create a more resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future. So let's go. Welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. And today, Dan and I are extremely excited to be joined by Steve Pullins. Steve is the CTO and SVP at AlphaStruxure, the joint venture between Carlyle Group and Schneider. And Steve, you have been living, breathing, and operating in the energy world for a long time, and really excited to hear your Renewable Rides journey. And we always start by asking our guests, what are you passionate about? So let's kick off there.
I am passionate about microgrids, have been ever since I can remember. My very first microgrid was a nuclear submarine in the mid-'70s. So, and if you think about all the characteristics that we talk about a microgrid today, a submarine has that. So I didn't know it at the time, but it was a microgrid, and that's where I learned a lot. And in fact, when we're designing microgrids today, there's a lot of principles of how we design, how we control, and things like that all date back to those early skills learned living inside of the microgrid.
That's amazing. How did you end up working on nuclear powered submarines?
Got selected, special program. I needed money to finish college, and the Navy heard that, and so they paid me to finish college, and then I owed them 6 years. So, but I really loved it. The best job I ever had, and I even stayed longer. So, and from there I stayed in the nuclear business for a while. I worked at Wisconsin Electric, and then went and ran ops and maintenance at a uranium enrichment facility in Ohio. So the first half of my 48-year career has been in nuclear, and the last half has been moving and using energy.
Steve, that is arguably the longest tenure in microgrids that we've heard yet. I love that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've watched the evolution from a nuclear-powered submarine, which there are still many today, but evolution to what you're seeing in the market today, what you're doing at AlphaStruxure?
So I really didn't recognize it as a kind of a career thing until about 2004. I was working on a project for the Department of Energy. This was the early days of smart grid, and I was helping formulate that whole picture of how should we approach this, things like that. And one of the things that kept popping up during that time, in that 2004 timeframe, was all of these distributed generators that are out there in industry and totally unutilized. And at that point, in 2004, we had a couple reports that said, hey, there's 80 gigawatts of, backup power and power available behind the meter and things like that. 12 million DER behind the meter in 2004. Wow. And it's like, wow, how come we're not using that? And at the same time, I was looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of the grid, the utility scale grid, And I was seeing a downward trend in the reliability and the utilization, the asset utilization, just how, given a design capacity of the grid and how much of that are we truly using, from an energy perspective, a kWh perspective. And I saw downward trends of that, and then nobody utilizing all this DER that was already existing behind the meter. So we immediately a group of us immediately went to town on that, trying to get, our grid brethren to recognize that, hey, here's an asset that you guys could be utilizing. And because you're putting it at the end of the network, right, you can actually change the voltage and load profiles, and you can really, make a great shift in how efficient the grid is. That, we cast that across probably 7,000 different people in the utility space, and maybe got a half a dozen ears. So it just fell flat, right? So that told me that there's an opportunity here, and so that's when we formed first company, Horizon Energy Group, and started working on microgrids. And and have gone through several leadership, sold companies and started up different companies, but it's always been a theme around microgrids, even working inside of big companies like Hitachi and working in Carlisle, one of their portfolio companies, and then AlphaStruxure. So so the last 19 years have all been around distributed energy, mainly in the form of microgrids. Because it's never going to take over the world. You don't want that, but you want it to be an aggressive, active player in the energy system. And the energy system doesn't stop at the meter, right? Whenever we talk about the bulk power system, okay, that's a true thing, right, all the way down to the meter. But remember, there's a ton of energy system behind the meter. And, when you're looking at what we do, working in the commercial industrial space, there's gigawatts of opportunity on the customer side of the meter. And it's perfect place for the microgrids to play.
So like you've obviously been seeing this and feeling it building for 19 plus years, Steve. Yeah. What's exciting you most about what you're seeing right now in terms of trends or opportunities that maybe weren't available or fell on those deaf ears a long time ago?
Yeah. So I think I think people have a tendency to just look at solving a single problem. Okay, I've got poor reliability at my site, so I'm going to do X. Right. And they look at that, and so I got a single problem. Here's a single solution. I need to be more resilient, in case a hurricane comes through and knocks power out for the next week and a half. I need to be resilient against that. Okay, so let's go do this. Right. Or somebody says, hey, new corporate mandates coming down from Germany or from wherever. And I need to be, net zero carbon by some date out in the future. And so I need to be more sustainable. So I'm going to do something that's more sustainable. So all these singular solutions, right? And, looking at a problem singularly and then defining a solution, a singular solution to go after that. That's not a microgrid. Okay. Yeah. That's DER, but that's not a microgrid. A microgrid says, oh, hey, if I do this thing over here for reliability, I'm going to get an uptick in my resilience. And if I do this a little differently with my reliability and my resilience, I'm actually going to reduce my carbon footprint. And oh, by the way, if I set this up for a long-term picture, then I'm taking all the variables out, or not all, but most of the variables out of the equation. And I can actually establish a long-term future where my energy costs are lower than they are today. Those kinds of things. So now that's a microgrid because I'm using multiple technologies put together smartly.
Yep.
That can solve multiple objectives at the same time. And that gives me system efficiency, that gives me capital efficiency, that gives me lower footprint, and I have options. I have flexibility to solve my reliability and my resilience issues as well. So it's those multiple objectives that really, in pulling those multiple objectives together, is really the difference that microgrids bring to the table. And the microgrid name gets co-opted a lot. I mean, there's even companies who don't do microgrids who have microgrids in their name.
Yes.
And just so I think it's okay if you want to play DER behind the meter, that's fine. That's a really good business too. But unless you're solving multiple objectives with an organized, electrically isolable system, you're probably just doing DER.
Yeah. And what do you think has been, we see the mounting interest in the market and we feel like the tailwinds are really strong, Steve. What do you think has been the kind of major shift in that? Is it customer awareness and education? Is it the pain points of mounting? Is it the fact that technology has got to a point where it now really competes with the cost of traditional energy? Is it all the above? Like, what are you seeing?
It is all of the above.
Yeah.
Now, so you could call that a perfect storm, right? Because we are seeing, challenges to our reliability and our resilience. We are seeing a very, very strong driver around sustainability, and we're seeing that customers in the industrial space and customers in the commercial space. I mean, it's happening in the residential space too. But what they're seeing is, and because they're looking at it as a line item on their budget, right, is that thing is not only increasing more than they expected, it's also quite uncertain where it's going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now in their budget cycle. And that's causing a lot of consternation. So you've got this not only these other factors going on, but you've got the new questions around whether or not I can actually continue to operate this plant at this location because of the uncertainty in the costs of electricity. And it's not just electricity; it's also gas, fossil natural gas. It's pretty stable at this moment, and it has been for the last 3 weeks. But that's the point, right? Is that gas is a volatile thing, and if you take a look at where we are post-pandemic and where the gas price was pre-pandemic, we're about 50% higher.
Yep.
So that so it is an ever-increasing cost of doing business as well. So whatever we can do to help minimize any of the factors that lead us to have cost in our cost of production or cost of goods sold, those are the things that our commercial and industrial customers are working on all the time, right? Because that's their core business. Energy is not their core business.
Yes.
And so they need a partner in that space, hence microgrids.
Yeah,
definitely. Steve, one of the things that we heard a couple months back from one of the major utilities in the Southeast was that their service applications were equal to that of their current entire grid capacity, which kind of brings to light another benefit of deploying microgrids. Have you seen that? Can you talk a little bit more about the availability of electrical service?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story. So when we first started up AlphaStruxure, which was 2019, first year and a half, we tried very hard to get into the data center business and bring microgrids to the data center business. And, Schneider's got a whole very large arm working data centers. They're one of the leaders in equipment and design for data centers, server buildings. And so we thought, we have all the tools we need to make this work. But we couldn't get any traction. And, there was this two-part business called data centers. One is the hyperscalers, right, who have typically on any given day have more money than the government, and they like to do all their business themselves, and they are energy savvy people, okay, and then you have the co-location data center people who are smaller and and they're selling server space by the drink, and things like that. So it's a much more difficult business model, and frankly, very few of them are creditworthy. So you can't go make super large investments in that from an energy perspective. So here we had this terrible situation where the guys we want don't want us, and the guys who want us, we can't invest in you. So we just backed away from it. And then last summer, late spring, early summer, we started getting all this inbound traffic from data center developers saying, "Hey, come talk to us about microgrids. We think we might have a project this would work for." And we heard this from data center developers in the East and in the Midwest and in the West. And it was like, what's going on here? So we started looking into it. And you've got the data center load is in 2022 is about 54 gigawatts. And the expectation, the projections are growing to 92 gigawatts by 2028. So that's a pretty big jump, right? So this goes along with what you're saying, Dan, about what you're hearing is that the service requirements going up. And I haven't even mentioned electrification of vehicles, right?
Yep.
Okay. Or just load growth that we haven't seen in 10 to 15 years. It's reignited. And the fact that complicating that maybe even further is as we start to look at ways to improve our sustainability, and we start electrifying buildings, right? Which buildings represent about 30% of the load in the country and 38% of the carbon footprint. So you need to, as you start to electrify those buildings and start moving from scope 1 emissions to scope 2 and all that kind of stuff, it is going to increase electric load. So there's a lot of things going on, and then you've got things happening out west, like PG&E is going through, Pacific Gas and Electric is going through an enormous transition where every spare capital dollar they have is being spent on undergrounding, distribution because of the wildfires and other, storm-related high winds and things like that. And now they have to work with, 24 inches of rain, and things like that. So we saw that. So we hear that at the same time we're hearing Virginia has decided that they can no longer build any more data centers. Northern Virginia is now officially full. And so you get these kinds of scenarios. And what we're hearing is that the utilities are telling these data center developers who have this objective to go basically double their capacity over the next 5 or 6 years. And they're being told, you're going to have to go someplace else because we just don't have the capacity available for you, period. And you come talk to us again in 3 or 4 years, and we'll see if we have the availability then, or you may have to wait another cycle. But there's just a real issue there. And so that's kind of like the new fifth objective that microgrids need to tackle, which is being an alternative to a major industry when that industry is no longer capable of relying on the grid for the availability of power.
Yeah, I'll get two great examples on the data center side. We actually had a data center provider for our business, and our service was down for a day because they were suffering a power outage and their data center was offline. And we ended up changing our provider. And I think this highlights the issue for businesses, doesn't it, Steve? Of if you can't, first of all, get access to energy, then you can't expand your business or run your business. And if it's not reliable, then you're at risk of losing customers and losing deal flow and eroding your margin. And these are all kind of, energy is truly the lifeblood. And I think business leaders maybe haven't quite grasped the importance of it or the fragility of it. But it's definitely mounting, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And if you take a look at, industry in general, commercial industrial firms in general, the electricity component, or let me broaden it, the energy component of their cost of doing business is somewhere between 6 and 25%, right? Depending on the industry and things like that. I mean, if you've got kilns at a cement factory, it's closer to the 25%, but a normal, commercial retail business is closer to the 6%. But if you take it away, everything else doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it's highly leverageable from a risk profile perspective. It's highly leverageable. So you have to get smart about that. And what we're seeing is customers are starting to get smart about that. They're making different choices.
Yeah. On that front, Steve, you've been working directly with large commercial and large industrial businesses for decades now. Maybe more in recent times. What do you think are some of the most common misconceptions of business leaders on why they should or should not adopt microgrids or DERs? Like, what are the common misconceptions?
I think there's a common misconception that I can do that. I think there's a common misconception that I can attack one problem at a time. You can do that, but at the end of the day, you're going to have 5 things that aren't connected, solving 5 different problems, and it's incredibly inefficient. You're going to pay more for that. So I think that's another thing that the industry has to get smarter about, or the commercial industrial space needs to get smarter about. The other thing is that I think some have shied away from microgrids because they just think they're just going to be too expensive, so that they don't even make the cut of having a discussion because they think it's just too expensive. And it's almost a definition problem. It's when they look at that and they say, and I've had customers tell me this, I want all the added reliability and resilience that you offer and the improvement in the carbon footprint that you offer, but I want it at the utility price that I have today. Okay. And that's just not fair. But what it is that we have a tendency to think in the moment about, I'm going to compare prices. That means I'm going to compare my tariff rate from the utility to what you're telling me the rate is today. That's not the answer. The answer is, what's it going to be 10 years from now? What's it going to be 20 years from now? And one of those paths is known because you just signed a contract for it, as an energy as a service. The other path is unknown. and has a historical perspective of escalating twice as fast. Okay. So why are you focused on this single point in time that really doesn't mean anything? You should take a look at the total cost of ownership over the next 20 years, unless you only plan on being in business for the next 2 years. Then stick with the utility, because you're going to be dead or gone. So it's if you have desires for a long-term business, you should be considering a microgrid, because even the cost is going to save you. It's going to save you money over the long haul.
It's a great hedging position, isn't it?
It is.
Lock in and hedge businesses hedge on cost all day long, but rarely on the electrical side of their business.
Yeah, we had, we recently signed a deal with, actually a year ago, JFK New Terminal 1.
Yep.
And, and that's like a 36-year energy as a service agreement. And one of the folks at who was within the New Terminal New Terminal 1 group, they listened well, and they said, I know what my price of electricity, heating, and cooling is going to be in 2040 and 2050 and 2060. And for a terminal operator who's got a deal out to 2060, that's comforting.
Yep.
Know that one of your measurable line items on your budget is a known quantity.
Yep. Yeah. Meanwhile, we saw that where Dan and I are located, San Diego Gas and Electric just celebrated the fact that they are no longer the most expensive utility provider in North America. They've just been outdone by PG&E, and their rates just got increased again. And businesses in the PG&E territory are going to see a massive spike in their bills this month as peak demand charges change and others, and it's not being clearly communicated to them how much their specific tariffs are actually being impacted.
Right. And a lot of times in the past, you just pull up stakes and you move to another state.
Yep.
But the truth is if you pay attention, the rates may be cheaper, but the escalators are similar. So it's not, and even if you have availability in that new location, if you have availability of power in that new location. So I think there's a lot of challenges yet to be uncovered or unwrapped around the whole commercial industrial space. And look, that's where the jobs come from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, I'll ask you to look into your crystal ball. I was going to say 5 years, but maybe let's extend that now to 2030. What has you most excited about this space?
I think there's a nexus between microgrid resources and RNG, renewable natural gas, right? Which is these are biogenic sources. They've already been demonstrated in some of the most rigorous carbon footprint mapping states that it is a viable and doable way of reducing your carbon footprint in a real sense, and you don't have to change your equipment, right? It's RNG means it's gas pipeline quality. So you put it in at point A and you take it out at point B, where the power is at a customer site. And that whole business in the United States is growing. In North America, counting Canada, is growing at greater than 30% per year. Okay. Wow. So it's real. And you've got a couple utilities. I know two utilities that their long-term, their 2050 strategy around what are they going to do with gas is, these are large utilities, 80% RNG and 20% hydrogen. 2050. That's their 2050 picture of how they're decarbonizing that part of their utility service. So I think we're going to see this continued effort, and it's not just about dairy farms, right? It's, we've only tapped about 8% of the landfills to, for collecting gas and turning it into RNG. It's food waste, in America, 33, the world is at 10% food waste and we're at 33%. Mm-hmm. So the CI score for food waste is around minus 125 gram CO2 equivalent per megajoule. So it's in the negative range, just like dairy and swine farms. And I think we're going to see, I just think there's a really continued growth there in that space. And I think microgrids are a perfect adjunct technology to go along with that. So by 2030, if you look at a little further, Dan, and we start talking about hydrogen, there's a couple things that have to be solved there, and it's going to take a while. So so hydrogen is a really good thing to have, right? And it's a good source of energy. We don't know how to do it very efficiently yet, but it is a good source of energy. But you have to separate that from the hype, because there's a lot of hydrogen hype. And to get to a ubiquitous state where hydrogen is as prominent as fossil natural gas as an energy source, and that can be used, in the petrochem industry, it can be used in power, can be used in heating, things like that. So very ubiquitous use. It's going to take a while because we have to be able to move it, not by truck. We have to be able to move it by existing pipelines or augmented pipelines. And there's the oil and gas guys have a few really good ideas. Like you take one of those big 24-inch fossil gas lines and you run a 6-inch pipe inside of it, and you run a hydrogen there, and all that can be, you consider the big pipe like a conduit, and now all I'm doing is pushing smaller conduit through it. So you can do it. It can be done. So there's just, and that's just one, right? So there's all kinds of things that can be done but moving hydrogen around will become a big challenge. And I mean, it is already. And so that means we're talking, mid 30s, 2040, time frame before we have ubiquity in hydrogen as a gas and some cost that we can live with. Will it ever be cost comparable to fossil natural gas? Probably not. But if all of the energy costs are going up, so it's where do we find our new normal, right? That we can live with. And I think hydrogen becomes a player out there in 2035, 2040 in our new normal.
Yeah. Steve, you obviously live and breathe this and think about it every day. What does the CTO of one of the leading microgrid businesses do? Like, what is your role? What are you thinking about? How do you move the needle?
Constantly refreshing the technology space, right? It's because there's great minds out there working on, this little piece and that little piece and that little piece, and they're all great pieces, and we need them, and they need to be shepherded along. So that's part of the role that I play is, kind of working on those working with those technology companies that are emerging, and I provide a lot of, free advice. Say, you need to think about this, you need to think about that, because they don't always have the best business model, or they may not always actually think of the best market. They may be thinking about, this residential space, and say, you're over here is where you're going to make your money. Take a look at your solution instead of looking at, utility scale stuff. You ought to be looking at these 27,000 grocery stores in the United States, or you ought to look at the 35,000 auto parts stores in the United States, or the 106,000 Dollar Generals, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, those mini Walmarts,
Yep.
and because they're all cookie cutter and things like that. So helping the technology guys figure themselves out is and I'm not the only one, but helping them look at that and giving them the perspective from which a company like AlphaStruxure comes is really valuable. I mean, we've had 2 of those calls today. So that's one. And then looking at helping our microgrid marketing team understand what the data is telling them, and how to nuance some of the data and some of the insights that come out. And some big name folks don't always get it right.
Yep.
And so you have to, when they come, some of them come to me and say, well, such and such person or analyst group says this and this other, these are like exactly opposite. So, who should we believe? And think, well, those are real situations. And it's not that either of them is completely wrong. It's just that they've skewed their studies looking at a particular thing, and they've missed something. Right. So there's a lot of that. And then always business model, always looking at how do we shape our business model to be faster, more complete, and easier to digest. And then the biggest thing of all really is educating the space, because the customers, they have a job around their core mission, right? And nobody's better than they are at their core mission, right? And our core mission is, energy as a service microgrids. So, we want to teach you about that, but we understand that you've got a day job.
Yes.
But so when we go in talking to customers, we're not selling them a solution. We're helping them figure out how those 4 objectives align, and how can you make an energy system for your site aligned with your objectives? And there's an art to that.
Yeah.
Steve, you've got a unique lens into the bleeding edge technologies and a deep understanding of all the hardened technologies out there. If you could be one energy technology, what would it be and why?
Well, I have to do that on a time frame, right? So what technology would I like to be over the next 10 years? I think it's energy storage. And the reason is that sitting here as providing energy to a commercial industrial firm, I don't have to, my industry, my stationary power industry doesn't have to spend any money on R&D in energy storage. Why? That's because that's all being done in the automotive industry. Mm-hmm. they are the bleeding edge. I should say leading edge of that space of the energy storage space, and we are getting so much value out of all of the things that they're tackling ahead of us. Okay, and I, when you take a look at the power of energy storage, it's not that I can put energy into it at a low cost and take energy out of it at a high cost. It's all the microgrid use cases, all the battery use cases. There's 12 battery use cases. And the fact is, if you build your battery right, you can do multiple battery use cases simultaneously. At the same time, I can smooth PV, I can smooth load, I can manage voltage, I can manage frequency, I can manage VAR, so therefore correct power factor, and do transitions between grid connected and island mode all at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's extremely powerful. At our Brookville bus depot, out of the 12 battery use cases that are commonly accepted, we're doing 9 use cases. Okay. At JFK, we're going to do 8 use cases. So energy storage has the ability to do multiple things at once. I like to refer to it as the utility infielder. And people who only give it 1 or 2 things to do, like utility scale wind and solar, they're really missing an opportunity, and they're short selling, the capabilities of energy storage. So that, to me, is the next 10 years. Okay, then after that, I think what we need to see is electrolyzer technology vastly improve. Now, I had an electrolyzer on my submarine back in the 70s, okay? Because we took seawater in, cleaned it up, made oxygen so that we could breathe, and we threw the hydrogen away. Okay? But that technology has been around for a long time, and there's a lot of room for improvement in the efficiency of it. For example, 15 years ago, a battery round trip efficiency in the 75% range was good. And today, if you're not making 91% round trip efficiency, you're falling behind your peers. And electrolyzer efficiency is around 70%. That should also take the same path. So I'd say in that second, next 10 years batteries, after that, really electrolyzer technology. And that goes along with the whole idea that for hydrogen to become more of a ubiquitous source for everybody, it's that whole efficiency, from the electricity that you get from a renewable through to the movement and use of it. Electrolyzers are a key point in that cycle. Yeah. So I would say that from a technology perspective.
Love it.
Great answer.
We haven't had the electrolyzer yet, so we'll take it. That's a great one. I think, and I agree with your point before, I think there's a huge amount of hype and buzz around it, isn't there? And people think it's something they need to be deploying today and it's going to change the whole world. And it's not in a position to do that.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to see spot examples, that have, building a hydrogen plant with renewables sitting on top of an old cavern, right, where I can do blue hydrogen, capture the hydrogen or capture the CO2 and stick it in the ground right there, and then doing that kind of thing. Oh yeah, that's great. We should be doing that right away. But how many of those are we going to do? right? 30, 40. Okay, do those. But then, and then the idea, for example, just the movement. A lot of people talk, oh, we should liquefy the hydrogen, right? And then it's really cheap to move around. And that is true. But you know how much it costs to liquefy hydrogen? It's like $4.76 a kg just to liquefy it. Okay. So the cost, and that's paying $3 for a kg of hydrogen. You're going to spend another, 4.5 to liquefy it. Yeah. I don't know. So there's lots of big problems to solve.
Got some work to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the quote that motivates you or drives you, or is your favorite of all time?
Actually, my favorite of all time is from a Bible verse about persevering through hard times, and out of that comes character, and out of that character comes hope, and hope will not disappoint. Okay, but I've heard a recent quote that I really like, or a motto from a company, and it's a company that works in software that helps designers. And the CEO of this company, he says, I want my people to say yes if instead of no because. And because what it does is it sets a much more positive mindset and a more flexible mindset for moving forward than the other, because no because closes the door, period.
Yeah.
And yes if not only keeps the door open, but it also invites people to come through it. So that's a recent one that I heard that I really like, and I think it's that kind of mentality that we in the energy industry need to have.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more with that. I think we're all trained, aren't we, through our careers, and especially those that have been in corporate world. It's no first unless you're kind of hyper convinced otherwise, and it just creates the wrong behavior.
Yeah, and there's a corollary to that too. So what I see in the investment community a lot is a lack of use of data. There's decision making is very anecdotal. And it doesn't matter what the data says. If the data says turn left, but that person in the financial industry or investment industry has a story that said, yeah, we turned left once, and we just need to turn right here. But the data says it, yeah. And so it's anecdotal versus data-based decision making is a weakness, and I don't know if that's a global weakness or just a U.S. weakness, but it's there.
It's something that we see as well. And to your point, it doesn't have to be that old either. We hear folks that are referencing, well, we explored this 3 years ago, but in this environment that's changing so fast, 3 years ago is actually ages
That's
compared
right.
to the realities of today.
Yeah, it's like one industrial revolution back.
Yes. Steve, I'll close out. One of the questions that we always ask our guests is that if you could listen to any guest on this podcast, who would you like to hear, and what would you like to ask them?
There are a few really insightful. There are a few, I'm probably being too critical, few insightful people out there. And one of the persons that I have found over the last 7 years to be truly insightful on many levels is Andrew Marino, who's head of strategy at Generate Capital. He used to be our boss from Carlisle.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've had several opportunities to spend a lot of time with him. I got to tell you, we went up to present to Dartmouth a microgrid concept for them, and we got snowed in. And we were there for like almost 3 days. So you get to spend a lot of time with somebody who's, chomping at the bit to get out of there because he's got a lot of businesses going on. But the point is that he, over time, has proven to be extremely insightful and creative and a force of nature. So he'd be a really good person for your travels here.
Well, I appreciate that flag, and it sounds like we might be able to lean on you for a personal introduction.
Could be.
This has been great, Steve. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom and decades of experience, which is somewhat rare in our industry. It's great that so many more people are joining forces with us to move this along, but to hear from someone that has so much experience has been extremely valuable, and I know our listeners will really enjoy this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. The education bit is key, as you say, and thank you for taking the time to share that wisdom. Well done. What a pleasure it was to learn about Steve's journey and get his insights into the industry. What was the standout for you?
Yeah, aside from the fact that he brought it back all the way to the 70s and working on a nuclear sub as his first microgrid, which was the first I'd heard that, and it makes complete sense. One of the OGs of the industry for sure. The thing that I really took away was his definition of a microgrid, which is, rather than looking at independent point solutions, it's really bringing them all together and being able to reap the benefits of all the value streams concurrently and checking many boxes across sustainability, resilience, cost savings. I think was a big one, along with the fact that these projects should not be looked at as a single point in time today, but how does it impact that business over the coming decades? Those are some of the biggest ones for me.
Yeah, it's super important, isn't it? Especially that long-term horizon, because even though these projects can pencil in year, 2, 3 years, actually being able to budget and factor in value for the long term, it makes it even more of a no-brainer and helps tell a story internally and helps de-risk the business like we're talking about in terms of hedging prices. I really liked it. And I think for me, one of the big takeaways was business leaders and our customers are becoming more and more aware and educated, and they're seeing the pain points mount. How do we change that conversation from no because to yes if? And there's lots of if value statements that we can create to really help tell that story and help businesses understand why they should be doing this. And I think if we all come into it with that frame of here's all the benefits that we can be selling, the stackable opportunities that you referred to, that becomes super exciting. And being able to do that with data instead of it being old misconceptions, gut instincts, or emotional responses that actually are not defensible because the industry is moving so fast and the projects are so exciting and the incumbent solution is failing quicker than we can really keep up with. So I really enjoyed that conversation. I think he's super experienced guy with a lot of deep thinking and experiences, and he's got the scars to help us all take it to the next level.
Yeah, it plays into the interconnectivity of it all and understanding that just because you may not think something can be done today, put a qualifier around it and explore whether it is possible.
Brilliant. Well, look forward to the next one. I think
enjoyed it.
Gives us a lot of food for thought.
Yep. Appreciate Stephen this time, and hope our listeners enjoy.
Have a good one.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.